Hello everyone and welcome to the Green Man channel. Hope you're all doing good and well. So in a recent poll I did, I asked you all which of 4 videos did you most want to see as the end of September premiere, and the most voted for video was this one, my top 10 thrash metal albums of all time. But before I reveal my choices for that list, I did just want to say something on the next most voted for video, which is the albums I'd give perfect 10 ratings to, or 10 out of 10 scores to. Very soon on the channel I'm going to be revealing what my top 40 albums of all time are, and I came to realise that my 10 out of 10 rated albums are going to be on that list. So rather than duplicate and talk about the same albums again and again, I thought I'd kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and I will just shout out the albums that I give 10 out of 10 scores to in that top 40 albums of all time list. Anyway, moving away from that, back to the world of thrash metal and my top 10 thrash metal albums of all time. So thrash is a subgenre of metal that I'd say, I wouldn't say I've fallen out of love with it, but I perhaps love it slightly less than I used to. My biggest phase with thrash was probably in my late teens and early 20s, when I was first discovering those classic albums. I'd say what reignited my love, because I did for a few years stop listening to it for a while, but what reignited my love of thrash metal was actually a lot of albums that were coming out in these sort of early 2010s periods, and I found myself getting back into it more again then. So anyway, there's a bit of a mixture here therefore I think of some of the more modern thrash albums, and then those which many would regard as the classics. You've got a bit of a mix here, and I hope you enjoy these albums, particularly if you've never heard some of these. I mean, some of these albums, yeah, go check them out if you've never heard them before. There's some great thrash on this list. Anyway, let's start with my number 10 pick, which is a band you've probably never heard of. They're a relatively unknown band. They're from Birmingham in the UK. They're called Eradicator. This was their debut album, Dystopia. Incidentally, Megadeth, 3 years later, released an album after this one called Dystopia as well. But the band actually didn't tell me when I was talking to them at a gig. They were like, well, we got there first with the album named Dystopia. And then kind of I sort of thought to myself, well, it's probably a pretty common name in metal for a song name or an album name, Dystopia, I guess, anyway. But anyway, who cares? This album, this debut album from this band is really fantastic. I think it's interesting because it's their debut album, but it sounds like a band that really know what they're doing, because the album is so, I think it's got a good structure. I think all the songs hit really well. It sounds like a band that have played together for a long time as well. The performances are all really tight, and the thrash hits, and it hits the spot on a lot of songs on this album. My personal favourite song here would be The Compound. The Compound is for me the track I would recommend you check out first, just because it's so good. But also you have songs on here like Hell's Sentinels and Judgment Before the Throne, and plenty of others that I think all satisfy your hunger for thrash if you want to check out something new and relatively recent. It's been 10 years now already, I guess, since this album came out, but it's a really good one, and it's number 10 on my list. Coming in closely following in the footsteps of that album is another much more recent album from 2021. This is Ravager and the Third Attack, an album which you guys actually recommended to me in the comments after I released my top 20 albums of 2021. Still my most viewed video on this channel by quite a long way, I believe. But yeah, you all recommended to me, check out this Ravager album. And I thought, well, okay, I'm going to go and listen to that. And I came back from that and realised just how good an album that was, and that it almost definitely would have been in my albums of the year list had I heard it pre-posting my end of year list video. And my favourite tracks on this are Planet Hate, A Plague is Born, the Third Attack title track. I just think it's kind of the faster, from the faster side of the thrash metal spectrum. This was very much kind of speed metal, very fast, very slick, again, very tight performances. Another great one for you to check out this time from as recently as 2021. Should I have included an album as recent as that on this list? Well, I guess it's my list, and I thought it's been a good 2 years now, nearly, and it's a really great album. Coming up at number 8 is Power Trip with their release, Nightmare Logic. Now, of course, Power Trip have been beset by a tragedy, by the passing of Riley Gale. And, but, despite all that, and despite the fact this album was also very popular. I mean, I remember Banger TV talking a lot about this album when it came out. I remember it getting a lot of hype and a lot of talk. But this album, Nightmare Logic, deserves all of that for me. I think it's a fantastic release from the band. I can see why it gets all the attention. It's just a great album. It has the sounds of the sort of Bay Area sounds of the 80s, the late 80s, but it you know, every song is fantastic on this album, I think. I personally love Executioner's Tax, Nightmare Logic, and Ruination. Ruination is a deep cut on that album with an absolutely monstrous riff at the start. I mean, if you're a thrash metal fan, you don't enjoy the riff at the start of Ruination, I'd probably ask, what's going on there? It's an absolutely awesome album. And what I love about Riley Gale's performance on this album, and his performances live, is he just doesn't hold back at all in his vocals and his performances. I think you can hear his passion in every single words, every single song he sings. One of the standout features, I think, sadly now, that we no longer have with Power Trip. But for me, it's just his untethered vocal approach to the songs that was one of the things for me that made Power Trip and this particular album as fantastic as it were the vocals of Riley. So yeah, what can you do? Rest in peace, Riley Gale. Coming up next at number 7 is the South American thrash, legendary South American thrash metal band Sepultura. I've gone with Beneath the Remains, their third release rather, back from 1989. So out of all the Sepultura albums I've heard, I think it's this one that I still come back to the most. And I wouldn't say they're necessarily so much as a band my sort of style of thrash, but I really like this album. It's pretty raw, it's unapologetically thrash for me. It's very ferocious. I think the Cavalier brothers here have a synergy, have a chemistry that is somewhat, you know, just brilliant on this particular album as well. My favourite tracks on this one, Struggle and Hate, Mass Hypnosis, and Lobotomy. So yeah, that's my number 7 pick, Sepultura, Beneath the Remains. Now move on to number 6, which is regarded, I think, pretty widely as a thrash classic. This is Years of Decay by Overkill. But I would say, even though Overkill, perhaps within thrash metal circles, do get credit, but I do feel that they're still somewhat underappreciated just generally in music. You know, when people talk about metal, and thrash metal in particular, it's always the big four that get the most attention: Slayer, Anthrax, Metallica, Megadeth. It's never other bands like Overkill, or Testament, or Exodus, or other thrash metal bands. For me, Overkill do deserve and they do merit a lot of attention, partly because they have released so many consistently excellent thrash metal albums over the years. And Years of Decay, personally, is one of my, well, it's my favourite from them, to be honest. And it's why it sits on my list, because I love Bobby Ellsworth's unique vocals. Sure, a lot of people sing in that way in thrash metal now, but I think in the 80s, I particularly, you know, I thought he had something quite maybe authentic for that time. The way he had that high register, and particularly the way he sings certain choruses on this album and stuff like, you know, in the tracks in particular, I want to shout out Elimination, Birth of Tension. There is a sort of slight shriek and scream he does when he's saying certain words in the chorus, like tension, tension, tension. I just love it. I think it's fantastic. And when I think of that sort of style of vocal, I often think of Overkill, and I often think of this album, Years of Decay, rather. Anyway, moving on to my number 5 pick, which is, and this is the album that reignited my love, I think, of thrash metal back in the early 2010s, when I hadn't been listening to it as much for a little while. It was Evol's Five Serpents' Teeth, all right, coming in here at my number 5 from 2011, that made me stand and listen and just realise, wow, have I been missing out? Because this band sound great. They reminds me of Master of Puppets era of Metallica mixed with Slayer. And I loved Matt Drake's vocals. I loved the guitar work. Everything just was like sounding like Metallica used to sound like. And for me at that time, I loved that. I thought this was like brilliant. It's a great album. But you know, this band's, the structure of this album I love. I love the songs. I love Dreams of Terror, with an amazing breakdown in that song. It's just awesome. Cult, Origin of Oblivion are two of my other favourite tracks on this album. Even In Memoriam, the slower, more melodic piece, I think is a wonderful song on this album too. Five Serpents' Teeth by Evol is to me kind of quintessential, more recent thrash metal. I say recent, 2011 now isn't actually that recent, but this album is maybe my favourite Evol album too. For me, it's an essential choice for the more modern thrash metal scene. I just think that. Anyway, now coming in at number 4, we go to one of my favourite thrash bands, I would say, but not the album that most fans of this band would choose. Because my number 4, believe it or not, is Souls of Black by Testament. And I have to admit, I think the thing is, this was one of my first Testament albums. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was my first Testament album. And the thing I love about this album is it's just one I just keep replaying. I've lost count of the number of times I've listened to Souls of Black and how much I enjoy it every time I listen to it. I think I think there are a couple of big reasons for that. I think one of them is Alex Skolnick's guitar playing on this album for me is excellent, top-notch stuff. I think he brings in a bit of melody to his guitar playing as well, and I'm a fan of that. You know, I like other guitarists that bring that into metal, because I think melody, if you can incorporate it into songs and incorporate it into thrash metal, I think it makes a difference. And I also really enjoy the vocal performance here of Chuck Billy, who just sounds epic on this album for me. And that's the thing. I mean, like a lot of other Testament albums, you know, you've got their earlier albums which are much more on the purist. You know, the thrash purists would prefer the early Testament work as opposed to this album. I mean, this album came out in 1990. It's still a relatively early album for them. But it was one where they slightly changed their direction just a little bit and their sound. It actually was apparently Guitar World magazine's one of their top 10 guitar albums from that year, interestingly. And I think perhaps Alex Skolnick does have something to do with that, because he's brilliant in his album, I think. And so yeah, not necessarily the band's most popular album, but it's my favourite. And Souls of Black, that's why it comes in here at number 4. I just think it's a great album. I really do. I just genuinely believe that. I just love Souls of Black, and I still can't get enough of it, however many times I've listened to it. Souls of Black, number 4. If you want to know my favourite songs from that particular album, title track, Falling Fast, and The Legacy, which was incidentally one of my favourite songs of all time on my top 40 songs of all time list last year. Coming in at number 3, another surprise pick here, and again, not the thrash purist choice. You know, this isn't a pure thrash metal album. I want to say that up front before I say the album and the artist name, because some people may be triggered. I don't know. You know what YouTube can be like, right? But this album, this is Silosis, and this is their release, Edge of the Earth, which is leaning a little bit into a prog territory for me, because it's got some long tracks. And the way the album is structured and some of the tracks are styled is somewhat proggy in its approach. But the thing is, to me, I probably wouldn't include this on a progressive metal list. I still think this is slightly more on the thrash side of the genre. In fact, Silosis aren't that easy to pigeonhole. You know, they have elements of metalcore, elements of groove metal, so it's not super easy to pigeonhole them. But if I was going to put them into any genre, it would still probably be thrash, because I think they have a very thrashy sound to a lot of their verses and choruses and all that kind of stuff. But they also bring with them melodic and ambient elements too occasionally. So they're a very interesting band for me. And this particular album, I think, is epic. I think it's an epic album. And Edge of the Earth boasts the likes of Sand of Time, Altered States of Consciousness, From the Edge of the Earth, Imperial Part 1. The dynamics, Josh Middleton is a phenomenal guitar player for me. I'm glad he's kind of finished with Architects, to be quite frank. I mean, I can see why maybe he joined them, but I'm glad he's back with Silosis doing what he does best. Even though their most recent album, it was not my favourite album from the band, it's still a very, very good one. But yeah, Edge of the Earth, holy hell. I mean, yeah, what an amazing album. What an amazing album. Coming in at number 2, we have one of the obvious picks on this list. You probably knew this was coming. I mean, if it wasn't here, I'm sure people would be up in arms, but I genuinely love this album. It's Rust in Peace by Megadeth. You knew it was coming, right? You knew a Megadeth album was going to be on here somewhere. and Rust in Peace is my pick. I mean, this is just technically an incredible album. In 1990, when this album came out, you know, you didn't really have so much really technical metal coming out. And I think Dave Mustaine and Marty Friedman brought in something here with astonishingly ambitious and technical and brilliant guitar playing. But with songs that all of that works well with as well. For me, it wasn't just about that. I think the songs on these are some of Megadeth's best songs, let alone the prowess technically that you get on here, right? And it's just a great album. It's a classic. I don't really need to say anything much about Rust in Peace. I think you all know, if you're here, how much of a masterpiece it is. And yeah, it's just brilliant. So Holy Wars, Five Magics and Tornado of Souls are my 3 favourites from Rust in Peace, if you must know. I'm sure they're probably amongst your favourites too from this album. Moving on now to my number 1 album of all time, a thrash metal album. You're going to get my number 1 album across genres pretty soon. But my number 1 thrash metal album of all time, predictably, I'm going to say, is Master of Puppets by Metallica. Many who might say, oh, this album is overrated. No, I don't think it's overrated at all. There's a reason why I think this album is loved so much, because it's just so damn brilliant. And for me also, I do think this is Metallica almost, you know, for me at their peak, and that might be controversial. I know a lot of people love Black Album era Metallica, a lot of people love Kill 'Em All era Metallica, a lot of people even love some of their later stuff. But there's just something about Master of Puppets that stands apart. Even with Ride the Lightning, I think, against it. Ride the Lightning is probably my next favourite Metallica album, but Master of Puppets just has something that binds it all together nicely. It's got a nice mix of the thrash and the hefty riffage with the melodies, and the songwriting is spot on for this album. I think the songwriting is fantastic from James, and I think, you know, that this is just really on point, this whole album. You have the likes of Master of Puppets, Disposable Heroes, Orion, Battery opening the album, The Thing That Should Not Be. Just read out all 8 tracks, why don't you? Because all 8 tracks are brilliant. And does that mean yep, this album is a 10 out of 10 as well. Why not? I may as well just say it now. It's a 10 out of 10 album for me, Master of Puppets. So yeah, that's the end of my thrash metal list for the favourite thrash metal albums of all time. Hope you enjoyed the video. Do let me know your top 10 thrash metal albums of all time in the comments. We all have different choices, different lists. It's all good. I may discover new albums that I haven't discovered before if you drop yours in the list. So do let me know your choices for your top 10 favourite thrash metal albums of all time. Until next time, from me, bye for now.